it slowly. All right, well, welcome to our Webex for February 26th. We've got an exciting agenda today. We're going to be talking with Sarah from the University of Minnesota Extension out of Morris, and she's going to be covering biosecurity and speaking specifically about PED and PRRS in swine operations. In addition, we'll be talking about our eligible alternative training process and a new way to get some of your trainings approved prior to attending the training to see if you'll get credit for it as viable training for your performance credits. So as always, please mute your line if you're going to be putting us on hold or talking to someone else in the room. Sarah, I think at this point in time, we're probably going to go ahead and introduce you, and maybe you can share a little bit about yourself with us before we get started and switch over to your presentation.
Okay. All right, thank you, Samantha. Can everybody see my presentation screen?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, thank you. Like Samantha said, my name is Sarah Sheik. I'm a swine extension educator out of the Regional Extension Center in Morris, Minnesota. I recently started in my position in June, but prior to that, well, I grew up on a small hog farm just northwest of Willmar, Minnesota, and prior to coming to my extension position, I was on faculty at Ridgewater College in Willmar, Minnesota, teaching in the agriculture department a variety of general livestock classes. So one of the ways that Samantha and I got connected and inviting me to present to you today is with the commercial animal waste technician workshops that she presented at in Sauk Center, and I'm presenting in a lot of the other ones across the state, is I've been on the agenda to talk about biosecurity, and a lot of the sites have also been asking me to give updates on PRRS and PED. So Samantha invited me today to present to you individuals, you know, what we know about PRRS. Some of that might be a review for a lot of you, but PED updates, because that is new to the swine industry. It was confirmed in the U.S. in May of 2013. So I would like to get you up to speed on what we do know about that, and then biosecurity guidelines for when you are visiting sites, some things to think about. All right, I do want to acknowledge a few individuals that I did speak to when putting my presentation together. First of all, the University of Minnesota, the Swine Disease Eradication Center, they are doing a lot of the research involved with PED, as well as other universities across the U.S. My main contact was Dane Goody, who has been doing a lot of the lab work with a lot of the projects I'll talk about today. National Pork Board has put a lot of resources, both financial to fund these research projects, but then also are a really good source for fact sheets as well. Dr. Scott D., who right now is down with the Pipestone Veterinary Clinic. Prior to that, he was with the University of Minnesota. He has done a lot of the research involved with PRRS and still continues in his position at Pipestone Vet Clinic to do research as well. And then Dr. Dave Wright, who is the coordinator of the North 212 PRRS Elimination Project. North of 212, so meaning US 212, there is groups of producers that meet on a quarterly basis and have voluntarily consented to share health information of their herds. and in hopes that that communication will help to eliminate PRRS, and then now recently they've added PED to that. So I am going to go over a review of PRRS. Some of it, might be things that you already know, as we've had that in the industry for several years now, but going a little bit more in detail on the specifics of our PED virus, and then talking about biosecurity for visitors at swine sites. So first of all, PRRS, which specifically stands for Porcine, Reproductive, and Respiratory Syndrome Virus. Like the name implies, it has a reproductive component to it, so it affects the breeding herd, reproductive performance, and then we see a lot in our grow finish stage of swine production, that respiratory component. Kind of like the name implies, it starts off with porcine, which means pigs, so therefore it only affects pigs. We have not seen it in any other livestock species. So looking at the impact of PRRS, a few pictures of what we would commonly see in the barn. First of all, the reproductive performance or component to the virus. We'll see abortions in those sows. Either they will, abort early in their gestation process, and we'll see a lot of stillborns or mummies. Mummies would be these darker fetuses here that died in utero, and the body is going through like the absorption process, or the stillborns where they appear to be fully developed, but they're just not born alive. We will have some sows that might carry that pregnancy to term, and they will give birth to some live pigs. A lot of times they are smaller in size than what our typical piglets would be. We might see in those piglets and or in nursery or grow finish, we might see death will occur, so we'll have dead pigs. And if those pigs do make it into like nursery or grow finish, we'll see some slow growth out of those pigs that have the virus. Additionally, with the respiratory syndrome component, it will affect their respiratory tract. So we might see, slow growing pigs, kind of like this picture here on the right side of the screen that my cursor is circling. Or if we look over at the left picture, this one pig that my cursor is circling, again, we can tell that, he's smaller in size, a lot skinnier than the others, indicating to us that, he's got some health challenge, and in this case, it would be PRRS. So why is this virus so nasty? Why has the industry, talked a lot about it over the years? Well, it spreads many different ways. Pretty much any way possible is what we found. Semen, blood, saliva, milk, urine, feces, intrauterine, so meaning that sow, if she has the virus while she's pregnant, she can pass that on to her piglets. Aerosol, which means it can be spread through the air. It's immunosuppressive, so meaning that, while the pigs have this virus, their immune system is weakened, which will make them more susceptible to other illnesses. And also looking at what type of conditions does the virus really thrive in. Well, it appears to cold and damp conditions is those type of conditions it can live in for a long time. In fact, Scott D. and his colleagues, when he was at the University of Minnesota, they looked at a PRRS survivability study, and this is kind of the general results that they found in terms of what condition. So for example, if we had frozen, they found that that virus can live for several years. If we're looking at our moist, cold, and wet, 11 days approximately. And then as that temperature increases, the length of time that the PRRS virus is alive decreases. So pointing out that it does like and thrive in the cold, wet conditions. Looking at in manure So looking at slurry, again, Scott D., continued on with his research when he moved to the Pipestone Veterinary Clinic. There he found that pigs can shed the virus up to 7 days in their feces. Looking at slurry, 14 days at 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit and 5 days at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I do want to point out that most of these temperatures and days that I was given, the temperatures were given to me in Socialist to help all of us better understand what some of these temperatures are without trying to do a conversion in our head. I have taken it upon myself to do those conversions for you. So you might be thinking, well, 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit, that kind of seems like an odd point to look at. And then looking at its survivability in pit solids, seeing that less than 14 days. So looking at, especially when we're talking about manure, that equipment, the attire that people wear, their coveralls, their boots, all of those are vehicles for transport of that virus, so can carry it from one location to the next that way. PRRS has also been shown to be infectious by aerosol, meaning that it does travel in the air. So looking at that, short distance of 9.8 feet is a distance that they found it at, and then looking at long distances, they did find it at 98 feet, and that was during application of manure that they recorded those distances. So again, why is the PRRS virus so nasty? Why have producers been talking about it for as long as it's been in our swine herd? Well, it's highly infectious. It can be a persistent infection up to 200 days in some pigs. So those piglets that are born alive that may have that virus at that time, they can still carry it with them into the nursery or the grow finish. The virus has been shown that it can mutate easily, so therefore there are some commercial vaccines on the market. However, it's not always the best match for what a producer might be experiencing in the barn. And when the veterinarians are trying to diagnose the virus, and if they do, whether it's a blood test or maybe looking for it in saliva, it's not always the easiest for them to identify if those pigs are positive with PRRS, especially if they've been given a vaccine for it. So therefore, they'd have to go the step further and actually do genetic sequencing to know if it's what they're picking up on the diagnostic test, if it's the vaccine that they're getting, or if it's actually a different strain than what's in the vaccine. So sometimes that creates a little bit of a challenge. So then what I would like to spend a little bit more time on before I get to the biosecurity is our PED, which stands for Porcine Epidemic Diarrhea Virus. Again, porcine means pigs, so therefore it only affects pigs. We don't see it affecting other livestock species. And also, I know some people, especially consumers, have the question of, oh, is the pork safe to eat? Yes, it doesn't affect the pork product at all. So specifically, what is our PED virus? Well, it is a coronavirus that's similar to TGE, which stands for transmissible gastroenteritis, which has been in the swine industry for many years, 60 plus years. So it's similar to that in terms of its clinical signs, where it affects the pig's intestine, and it will cause severe diarrhea and vomiting that can affect 100% of the herd fairly quickly. In terms of the vomiting, mostly we're seeing that in the younger pigs, not as much in like the breeding herd and the grow finish. And there we'll definitely see those loose stools from them, but definitely our younger pigs will see that diarrhea and vomiting. It moves quite quickly through a herd. Clinical signs can appear as early as 22 to 24 hours in individual pigs after they've been exposed to it, and then if we're looking at the herd level, anywhere from 2 to 4 days. So of our impact, I would say the piglets. So those suckling pigs that are nursing on that sow, those are the ones that are really affected the most. As with the severe vomiting and diarrhea that they go through, if they have this virus, we see severe dehydration, which the dehydration can cause up to 100% mortality in those piglets, especially if they are less than 7 days of age. A couple reasons for that: they're young, they haven't built up the body reserves yet to be able to handle that vomiting and diarrhea, and also the way that they digest the lactose, which would be the carbohydrate source in their milk, versus the carbohydrate source in solid feeds that those older pigs get is slightly different. For our feeder pigs and our grower pigs, yeah, we'll see, the diarrhea in them. A lot of it might be loose stools more than the actual runniness. Not necessarily seeing a lot of vomiting with them. With that, they're not feeling good. So we're going to see them go off feed, be lethargic, meaning they're just going to kind of be laying around, not wanting too much activity. With the off feed, we'll see reduced in feed efficiency, which will cause additional days to market. So when we're looking at financially for that producer, they're going to have those pigs a little bit longer than they would if they were healthy. And then, again, it's going to affect their immune system. So they're going to be more susceptible to other illnesses as well. This is a picture of piglets that unfortunately are mortalities. As you can see looking at them, they look quite dirty. So this would be like the vomiting and the diarrhea residue that they've got on those carcasses. And looking at them, especially this one, can point out that my cursor is going around here on the left side of the picture. Really emaciated looking. So meaning really, they've lost a lot of body condition. They're really thin. And so again, it's not the virus that is causing the death in these pigs, it's actually the dehydration that unfortunately they're experiencing because of the vomiting and diarrhea. Looking at our breeding herd, very similar to our grow finish animals. Again, off feed, lethargic, reduced body condition, basically meaning that, yeah, they're losing weight. And for pork producers, when they're trying to assess, do we need to feed our breeding stock more or less, body condition is one of the things that they look at, because if we've got, for example, a sow that's too thin, it does affect her reproductive performance. Either she has a silent heat, so we don't know that she's in heat and it's time to breed her, or either she doesn't become bred, she doesn't settle, or maybe she doesn't carry those piglets to term if she was bred. And then really with this PED, first being confirmed in the U.S. in May of 2013, we still have a lot of questions. The full impact is not fully developed or determined yet at this time. So we'll be looking at some more of these things and how they exactly impact those pigs. So why is it so devastating? Why is it the buzzword that we hear or maybe see in print everywhere? Well, research shows that it doesn't take much to infect that pig, and in the next couple slides I'm going to put that into perspective for you. At the farrowing farms, like I mentioned, those piglets are the ones that are hit the hardest. So if we have 100% mortalities going on at the time in those barns of our piglets, it can claim on average 5 weeks of production. So meaning, we're not having any piglets that are weaned during that time, which then causes a ripple effect into our nursery and finisher sites, where, they're planning that, on X number of days, they're going to be able to fill their nursery or finisher sites. But if the farrowing farm, which was their supplier, come down with PED, well, now that does affect the rest of the stages of production. So some of those farrowing sites that do experience 100% mortalities, unfortunately, this is the devastating picture that we find, whether it's, hauling them away in the bed of the pickup truck, or if it's, the bucket of the bobcat that's hauling these carcasses away. So it is quite a devastating sight at some of these farrowing farms that are experiencing high mortalities. So now going to the infectious dose, and this is where some of the research from the University of Minnesota Swine Disease Eradication Center comes into play. One of the studies that they're looking at is, what is that infectious dose? And what they found that in manure, a 10 to the -8th dilution of the virus is enough to cause infection and clinical signs. When I say infection and clinical signs, I'm referring to it's causing the vomiting and or the diarrhea in those pigs. We notice that in them. Now, when the diagnostic lab is trying to determine if a fecal sample has got PED or not, one thing that they're doing is what we call a PCR test. Basically what that does is it replicates that virus so that it can be detectable. Now, when we've got the dilution of 10 to the -8th, that amount is so small that it's actually coming up negative in those PCR tests. However, though, that amount, through research that they've done, we know that that small amount is still enough to cause the vomiting and diarrhea in those piglets, actually all stages of development. Now, 10 to the -8th dilution, if most of you are kind of like me, you're thinking, oh my gosh, that is an extremely small number. I can't even fathom what that is. Well, to help you put it into perspective, that would be about equivalent of 1 gram of feces, which I also have expressed in ounces there. But if you think of 1 gram of feces, if you can picture like a number 2 pencil and think of the eraser on the top of that number 2 pencil, that would be about the 1 gram of feces. But now if we diluted that feces into 26,420 gallons of water, so that mixture would be about equivalent, or is equivalent to that 10 to the -8th dilution. And if that mixture we fed to all the pigs in a barn, that would be enough to infect that entire barn with our PED virus. Now for research, they took that to the next level and said, okay, well, if 10 to the -8th, causes our clinical signs and infection, how about 10 to the -9th? Well, they did find that it replicates in the intestine, but it does not cause any signs in those pigs. And consistent with what they found with the previous dilution, that is also PCR negative. So looking at treatment and prevention, what are some of the things that they're doing in the barns? Well, first of all, there's no specific treatment available except basically maintaining hydration. Some of the barns, are making sure they have electrolytes go through the water line, because with the vomiting and diarrhea, dehydration can occur, causing that electrolyte imbalance. So if we can keep them hydrated, that's the best thing, because again, like I mentioned, it's not the virus that's killing the pigs, it's the dehydration that is causing their death. Recently, Asia and Europe, they have experienced the PED virus. Europe, actually, specifically England, in 1971 is the earliest reports of the virus there. However, any vaccines that they have over in those countries, they've not been approved for us to use here in the States, and also the question of their effectiveness is also in question. Now, recently, I guess when I say recently, it's probably going on a month and a half now, Harris Vaccines, which is out of, I believe, Ames, Iowa, they have developed IPED vaccine. It's still going through the approval process, so therefore it's currently available only through a veterinary prescription. And what I've heard is it's mostly being used in those herds that have already been infected. So then they're giving that vaccine to other sows in the breeding herd and or gifts that haven't farrowed yet, in attempt to hopefully develop immunity in those breeding animals so that they can pass that on to their piglets. Still, though, the effectiveness is still a question as it is a new vaccine. Other things producers are doing, many are following a feedback protocol similar to what was done for TGE when that was really viral within the industry. You may have seen some of this in the news, as I know, I think it was PETA actually did an undercover video at a Kentucky site. I think it was released last week, that video. This is a protocol that has been used in the industry for a long time in events like this where we don't have a vaccine available to build natural immunity by taking feces and or intestinal tracts from infected pigs that have died because of the consequences of the virus, and then mixing that back into the feed and feeding that to the breeding herd as a way, again, to try and develop immunity with them. Still, the question is out there is how long does that immunity actually last? But for right now, the feedback protocol has shown to be one management tool that producers are using to minimize the mortalities that they're experiencing. Another thing that producers have been doing as of late is weaning those piglets earlier than usual. On average, pigs are weaned at about 21 days of age. Well, some producers that I've talked to most recently have weaned as early as 8 days of age. One of the reasons, I kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier, the way that that piglet digests a solid milk diet or 100% milk diet versus a solid food diet, whether it's pellets or a ground feed mixture, is different, where when they're on that lactose diet, their body is taking a lot of liquid in order to digest and absorb that. So because of that, those piglets, that's why we're seeing that severe diarrhea in them and vomiting, where if we wean them earlier, we can get them on an early starter ration. So now we're putting them on a solid food diet. Yeah, they're digesting that and absorbing those nutrients a lot different. So therefore, we don't see as severe diarrhea in those pigs. And producers that I have talked to that have done this early weaning said that they've cut their mortalities down to about 12 to 15%. So a lot better than the 100%. And then lastly, biosecurity is really the main message that the industry is trying to get out to everybody. So if we can just keep it out of the barns and those that have been infected by it, if we can isolate it to those barns, that's going to be the best thing that we can do in terms of trying to prevent it. So then the question of, well, how exactly is it transmitted? I talked about earlier how PRRS is transmitted, lots of different ways. Well, for our PED, it's basically spread by what we call a fecal-oral transmission, which basically oral contact with fecal material that is contaminated with the virus. So a lot of those routes, whether it's pig-to-pig contact, maybe it's people, on your clothing, your shoes, whatever you might have some manure on you that is infected that can be passed on to site, or maybe it's through vehicles, whether it's the inside of our vehicles, maybe the floor mats, or if it's tires and or equipment that we would use at those farms. And then it's been shown that the virus can be shed up to 3 to 4 weeks from those pigs that have experienced the virus. So what's the main concern for producers out there in terms of spreading PED virus? Well, mostly what we've seen is it's through fomites, which basically that's the fancy term for things that I went over on the previous slide, such as vehicles, equipment that we might use at the farm, our clothing, whether it's our cover-ups, our boots, disposable, those type of things is the main way that they've seen that it's been spreading from, those sites that have come down with it. There is a question about aerosol. A study that Bob Morrison and colleagues at the University of Minnesota Swine Disease Eradication Center have done, and this is a study that they haven't looked only in Minnesota, but some of our earlier states to come down with it. For example, they've looked in Oklahoma because of the prevailing winds that Oklahoma is known to have, and then also they've looked at North Carolina as well because that state, we saw lots of cases of it early on. What they found is that they collected the virus up to 10 miles away in the air, but then when they introduced that virus that they collected to those pigs, they were not able to cause clinical signs in those pigs. So that's a reason why we've still got that question out there that it's spread by the air. We know that, yes, we can pick up the virus in the air, but we have not proven that that can be infectious. So looking at manure slurry risk, because I told you that it's fecal-oral transmission. So we know manure is a hot site for this virus. Well, Sagar Goyal, through more research that he's done at the University of Minnesota, found that it really likes cold temperature. It's alive in manure slurry for up to 14 days at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. But when we look at a cold temperature, such as we've experienced a lot this winter, -4 degrees Fahrenheit, it is still alive at 28 days. Now, his research project, the way it was set up is it ended at 28 days. He suspects that the amount of virus that was still alive in that sample was very prevalent, so he assumes that it is possibly alive for longer than 28 days at that -4 degrees Fahrenheit. So just to prove that it really does like the cold temperatures. And of the cases that have been reported to me, yeah, my email box has, for the last month or a little bit longer, I've certainly seen an increase in cases that have been, come across my view. So then talking about biosecurity, as I mentioned that, that's really the key message for anybody working with the industry, not only those that are in the barns on a day-to-day basis, but anybody that might have contact with any of these sites. Biosecurity is really the thing trying to push so that we don't spread it from site to site. So now I know, with talking with Samantha a little bit, kind of understand what some of you might do on a day-to-day basis. Some of you might be going to a site and you might have a scheduled visit at that site. Sometimes maybe you're going to sites that, you got a call, like a complaint report or something, and so you're going without notification to that producer. If at all possible that it is something that you have scheduled and lined up, make contact with that producer beforehand and know what their biosecurity plan is, because each producer might have a slightly different protocol that they're using. So discuss what that specific protocol is for that producer. Make sure that when you go to those sites, you're wearing clean clothes and footwear, which hasn't been worn around livestock. Now, if you've worn it around livestock before, make sure that it's washed before, so that it's clean clothes. Carry cover-ups that have been clean and disinfected in a container. So, for example, if you are using a cover-up and boots that are not disposable, make sure that they're clean and that you've got them in a separate container so you know that, okay, these are clean, they haven't been exposed to anything else. And know when and where you last visited a swine site. I understand that most of you, when you're visiting a site, you're not necessarily going in the barns. You might just be walking outside of the barns. So again, I would recommend, if you are able to have contact with that producer prior to visiting, talk with them about what their downtime is. For a lot of sites, if somebody is going into the barn, they recommend on the low end a 24-hour, so meaning like a one-night downtime, anywhere to a 72-hour downtime. And the difference between those times is it depends on what we have in the barns. If we've got, like a farrowing site, those piglets are more susceptible to illness, so therefore that producer might follow on the stricter end of the 72-hour. If it's a grow finish site, typically, their immunity is built up and they're not as susceptible to different illnesses, so then, maybe the 24-hour. Also, it depends on, what sites have you been to? Have you been to sites that they have recently had a health challenge or currently are having a health challenge? Again, even though you might be outside, still consider that area as a potential infected area. Another thing I like to say is go from like clean to dirty. So when I say clean, I'm talking about clean is that site, as far as they've told you or as far as they currently are not experiencing, a PED or a PRRS challenge or any other illness challenge. And then dirty would be those that have very recently had PRRS or PED or anything else. Another thing, I guess, to point out in that area too is if you know that the sites are, for example, farrowing or a finisher, like I said, try to plan, if at all possible, your week that you're doing like the farrowing sites earlier in the week and then move to your grow finish sites. So when you do go and visit that site, try to plan your entrance and exit with as minimal crossover with farm traffic. First of all, don't park next to the facility. I know it's nice and convenient. You don't have to walk very far, but that's a place that the employees on a daily basis are, coming into the barn or exiting the barns at that place. So try to minimize any crossover of the farm traffic. Maybe it's best to park on the road and then walk up the driveway to that facility, again, to minimize that crossover. And never enter that facility without authorization. Most producers, they want to know when visitors are coming, so that, not that they're hiding anything, but that for biosecurity reasons, they're trying to, control individuals coming in, so that, they're trying to control any of those illnesses that could come in. So if you have contact information, phone number for the individuals in the barn, notify them that way and tell them to, meet you outside. And again, they should be understanding of that, because that's what they would like. Then the line of separation is something that has become a popular phrase when we're talking about biosecurity, especially with PED. Basically, the line of separation defines an area used by you, which would be the visitor, and an area used by daily farm traffic. So try not to cross over that line. So especially when I said, minimize the crossover between farm traffic and you, try not to cross over that line of separation. So now each operation might have a different area of line of separation. They might have multiple lines of separation. One common one that for you individuals, I would say should be an automatic line of separation would be when you're coming out of your vehicle. Make sure, no matter if you're on the road or if you are driving up on a driveway to that facility, when you get out of your vehicle, that you've got some sort of feet protectant on. So whether it's disposable boots or maybe it's your clean rubber boots, make sure you have them on before you step foot on the ground. Because think of when you're coming, if you want to think of, you potentially could be carrying something and you don't want to put it onto the ground of that facility where farm workers are going. In the event that you would go into a facility, or just to let you know what producers are doing, in the facility they also have their lines of separation, where it might be a spray painted line on the floor. So they've got their dirty side, so they've got their street shoes, they step over into the clean side, which has their barn footwear. Or maybe it's the bench system, where they've got dirty on one side, take off shoes, and then go over onto the clean side, where they either shower in and put on protective clothing that's going to be worn only in the barn and doesn't cross out. So before you go to a site, I suggest for you to plan ahead. Think of how are you going to manage that line of separation when you get to that site. Some suggested things would be, kind of, I mentioned a little bit earlier, is have a storage container where you're going to have your clean items. So if you get out of your vehicle with your plastic boots on, and maybe in the trunk of your car, or the back seat of your car, or in your truck, whatever you might be driving, is where you might have that container for your clean clothes. So have some place that you can have that separated from the dirty clothes that you will be taking off later. Clean equipment, so yeah, make sure that your equipment is clean when you arrive. Also, we'll talk about this in a few slides here, but clean that up before you leave. And then have a disposal plan. So if you've got disposable boots or disposable cover-ups, do the reverse of from when you arrived. Take that off. Don't get into your vehicle with that on, because either that day or the next day you're going to be going to other sites or later on in the week. So make sure you dispose of that. And suggestion would be is don't dispose it at the next site you go to. Dispose it at that site that you currently are at, or have another means of disposing it where it's not going to contaminate other sites. So exactly a little bit more in-depth process of how can you create that clean crossing. I mentioned some of this before. Cover up. So wear protective clothing when crossing a line of separation. So for this individual getting out of his truck, he's got his disposable boots on before he even touched the ground. It might also include coveralls and gloves. So here, he's got his disposable boots until he got to his container of clean items. He does have a mat on the ground to protect himself from when he took the disposables off while he's getting dressed with everything else, and then putting those rubber boots on. Then contain. So when you are done, dispose or store away any contaminated supplies. So for example, now this individual is doing the reverse. He's taking the dirty rubber boots off. He's got his contaminated bin where he's putting his washable coveralls and boots in. And then if you've got anything that's disposable, have a bag or a container that you put that in so you can contain that and keep it away from any other clean items that you might have with you. Continue to do the cleanup process by washing and disinfecting all contaminated supplies. These pictures are showing, he has hand wipes and is washing his hands. It might even be maybe washing your steering wheel, just in case you would have touched anything, not knowing it, wiping that steering wheel. Some of the veterinarians I've talked to, they even have a bottle of disinfectant, which I'll talk about here in our next slides. They'll have that mixed up in a spray bottle, and just to preventative measure, they'll spray their floor mats, their foot pedals with that as well, just in case, to take that extra step of precaution. So when we're talking about cleaning and disinfecting, I guess the gold standard would be that you wash to remove manure, disinfect, and dry. Now with PRRS and PED virus that I talked about earlier, there are some disinfectants that, for example, with PRRS, that there has been some research done by Pitkin, Oatkey, and D from the University of Minnesota, they found that Virkon and Synergize were the most effective for PRRS. Currently for PED, we have a longer list. I will tell you though, and I'm not being paid to endorse this, this is just things that I've heard from veterinarians that are working kind of what you want to say on the front lines every day. They have found Synergize to be the most effective for not only cleaning trailers, but also for disinfecting the barns in between each group, and also any supplies that they have. And in terms of, how long do you need to have that on your boots? Read the label of a lot of those disinfectants. I know Synergize, because I've got a bottle of that for myself. I think it says 10 minutes for it to be exposed on your boots, but again, check that label and do what it says there. So for cleaning our equipment, it really is a two-step process. Cleaning is referring to removing any manure, organic matter. That's 90% of the process. The disinfection, so using sanitation, that's 10% of the process. Manure cannot be disinfected. I know as I've done some of the manure applicator workshops, some of the comments I've got is, well, can I just spray a disinfectant on? Do I have to power wash the entire equipment? Well, the organic matter, which in this case is our manure, acts as like a protective barrier. So it doesn't allow the disinfectant to do its job. So it is important to remove all of that manure. And some individuals, have asked the question, well, can I just bake it? Heat it up really, really hot, and will that kill the virus? Well, research that has been done at the University of Minnesota, they did just that because they knew people in the industry were going to have those questions. What they found is they heated PED virus that was embedded in feces to temperatures of 104, 122, and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and they found that at those temperatures, it can survive for over 7 days. So again, the organic matter does act as kind of like a protective barrier to that virus. So it is very important to remove all organic matter. So if you are going to have rubber boots that you're going to use again at another site, I highly suggest you to think about that two-step process. So the first would be is to remove all organic matter from those boots, and then second, disinfect. Not only get the bottoms, but also have a brush that you can get higher up on those boots as well. Now I know in the industry, over the years, there has been things that we refer to as foot baths, where you might not be doing the first step of spraying it off. But some things that we found is, once you get that organic matter, so in this case the feces in that foot bath, depending on how much you're introducing into that foot bath, it is going to inactivate that disinfectant. So it is important, again, to remove all organic matter before we do that disinfectant process. So with that, I want to end with a quote that I've also been ending the custom animal waste training workshops with is, it's in all of our best interest to work to prevent the spread of this virus. Not only are producers heightening their biosecurity, but they are also trying to get the message out that it really is all of us. So everybody in the industry, we would like to have them help out with increasing their biosecurity as well, and hopefully we can manage the number of new sites that are coming down with the PED virus. So with that, I want to thank you for your time this morning. You're invited to ask any questions that you might have. If you'd like to contact me at a later date, whether it's regarding this presentation or another question that you might have, I've got my office phone number up on the screen, which is 320-589-1711. Otherwise, email is an excellent way to get a hold of me, and my email address is there as well, which is schi0466@umn.edu.
Well, thank you, Sarah, very much. I think that was a wonderful presentation to talk about biosecurity. And just a couple things that I was thinking about during the presentation, as I think, you know, there's a lot of us that are doing like level 2 inspections too when we're out in the field looking at manure application in a field. And that's a way that we can also become, you know, get dirty boots, dirty shoes, contaminated equipment just from walking around in those fields, because it sounds like this stuff can be applied and still be alive and very easily transferable. So, you know, even those level 2s or level 3s, when we're looking at manure stockpiles, we're looking at, let's see, pardon me, level 2s are records. Thank you. Level 3s. Got corrected on my terminology this morning. Level 3s are when we're looking at manure stockpiles and or in the field land applications. Just to keep in mind that you should be using biosecurity there as well. Are there any other questions or comment? Or Sarah, maybe you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess while we're waiting for any other questions that might pop up. Yeah, Monday night I was at in Princeburg area where we had one of our quarterly North 212 PRRS elimination meetings, and we've also included PED in on that. So on the program, one of the producers had just kind of shared their experience with PED. That individual was a finisher site. They had come down with PED. You know, he said, of course, he did not see the vomiting in those pigs because, again, they were grow-finish pigs. They were getting ready. I don't remember exactly what weight they were at, but they will be to their finished weight shortly. But he had mentioned that, you know, when they became diagnosed, confirmed that they had this, and then trying to retrace their steps of, okay, what happened? How did we get this? It came down to the bobcat that they used on that farm to clean up, you know, any shavings that came out of the trailer when those pigs arrived at that site, or any that were leaving that site. So the shavings off of that trailer was also, the bobcat that was used for those shavings was also the same bobcat that was used for snow removal around that site. And, you know, he was completely honest and said, yes, some of my workers, you know, they might shower into that facility when they arrive, but then they might have to go outside, you know, pound on a bin because maybe it's, you know, bridged or something, or maybe they have to check on something outside, and then they go outside and then they come back into that barn. And he said just them walking, you know, outside the facility in that area where the bobcat was used for snow removal and was also the same one that was used to clean up any shavings that came out of the trailer. He said that that's what they traced it back to be. So, yeah, just going off of that comment that Samantha made, that, yeah, even being in the field around the manure applicator equipment could be, you know, a potential what we would call a dirty site. So consider that the same thing as walking into a facility.
There's one more question there. It says, has there been any research on whether it is persistent in the soil when it's land applied?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, I'm not aware of any current research that's looking at that. I would assume that it's probably a question that they have, but I don't know of any results right now that are looking at that or have any answers for that.
Okay. Well, maybe that's a follow-up one.
Yeah. I do want to point out, you know, I talked about some research in my presentation today, and I also mentioned that the National Pork Board has put considerable resources towards this. What they are doing on their website is any projects that are funded by them, they're having the researchers give, you know, regular updates on what's going on. So that would certainly be a good resource if you want to keep tabs on what's going on. And that website would be www.porc, tek.org/PED, and that should bring you to all their fact sheets, which a lot of what I went over today was based off of that, and then also the research as well that they're currently funding.
All right, thank you very much. This has been really eye-opening, and I know sometimes we get a little tired with biosecurity and we don't think it's important, but I think it really is, and we need to keep that in mind even for our dairy facilities and our beef facilities, because there are other diseases that we can be transporting. So even at your county, it might be a discussion that you want to have with your supervisor, just kind of coming up with a plan for what you're going to be doing at these sites to ensure that we are not the fomite, we're not the transport for these diseases. So, any final words, Sarah, or other comments?
Just the last thing is, thank you again for allowing me to present to you today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for being willing to. It's awesome when we can get outside speakers that can share such valuable information with us. So with that being said, Sarah, you're welcome to stay, or you can disconnect. We're going to just talk about one last item, and then we can let people get back to their days.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so our next agenda item is just to let you know what we're doing with our process for determining eligible alternative trainings. The training team discussed this, and we've sent this to our feedlot management team, and then feedlot management team presented this to MACFO as well. So one of the things that we've seen, just to jump right in, and I'll be happy to share this with you guys as well as put it on the training team homepage, is that a lot of times you guys will attend other trainings that are non-MPCA sponsored, and you don't know until the end of the year whether those trainings will be credited or not. And so we want to try to be more consistent and let you know even ahead of time whether or not that training is going to be valued for your performance credits. So what we're asking is that when you have a training you're thinking about going to, you send the agenda to us and or any other associated information to the training team lead via email, and we'll discuss it at our regular once-a-month meeting. We request that in that email you request as the CFO how many hours you believe this training would be valuable for, how many hours you want to get credit for. We might, and the team has representation from CNAT, MACFO, other county members, and other MPCA staff. So we're kind of representing a broad section of folks. If it's approved, we will send you an email. We ask that you retain that email for your year-end reporting for your supplemental form. The training team made an agreement that we have to reach consensus on the approval, so everybody has to agree. If consensus cannot be reached, it'll go to our feedlot management team for a final decision. If it's denied, we'll send you an email after the meeting. Let's say that it's denied because the agenda is a poor agenda and it doesn't give us a good picture of what the training was about. If you come back with a PowerPoint or other factual information that shows that there's obvious application to your work, we ask that you consider just resubmitting it to us and so that we can take a look at that. And then once they're approved, any of the approved trainings will be put on our training homepage starting in 2014, so this year. We'll start making a list. So for future years, we're more consistent with what we approve and what we haven't approved, so that you know ahead of time. You can even look at that list and say, yeah, this was approved in 2014. This is a good one to go to. And it can also kind of give you a heads up of potential trainings that might be coming that you want to go to that you want to otherwise know about. So this document will be posted on the training team page. We're not going to do like a big appeal process. This is not meant to be like a big ordeal. This is meant to be a quick way to say, yep, this is worth 5 hours, this is worth 2 hours. This is to give you a heads up if you want to pay the travel and the cost to go to these trainings, so that you know they're going to be counted. And so you can maybe plan kind of where you want to go and what you want to do. If it's denied, like I said, you can resubmit with more factual information saying this was really beneficial. And with the representation that we have on the team, it should be adequate to just make a decision. Other than that, I encourage you to read through this document, get familiar with it. If you've got trainings coming up, feel free to start sending them in our direction. The team will discuss it, and we've been really, I think we want to try to be as inclusive as we can with trainings because we want you to go out there and learn and get information. We also want to make sure that it does connect back to your county feedlot officer work and job so that it's applicable. Other than that, any questions or comments that anybody would have? Bob, did you have a question? Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any questions or any chats coming up on this, so what I'll do is I'll request that Forrest put this up on the training page. Feel free to read through it. This is kind of what we're going to do this year and evaluate and just try to maintain as much consistency as we can with approval and also list them out. So please get familiar with going to that training homepage website. If you haven't ever been there, I encourage you to go there. We have our links to all of our Webexes, and then also we'll have some other good information like this stuff starting to pop up on there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed our guest speaker today. I know I did. She's very knowledgeable. We got her contact information. If you weren't able to write that down and you would like to contact her for a producer meeting or something like that in your area, please feel free to shoot me an email and I can share her contact information as well. All right, well, with that being said, it's 11:03. I think we're just going to wrap her up for today. Thank you for attending. I will be sending out the recorded version, so if you know somebody would like to see this or you want to share it with them, the recorded version should be coming out shortly. All right, well, you guys all have a wonderful day, and stay warm and stay off the roads if you're in blizzard areas, and we will talk to you soon.